Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Monday. It's great to start off another week in the NSE with you all. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 925th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Yevgeniya Baras and Amanda Millet-Sorsa. We are thrilled to welcome poet Sophia Dahlin here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. Yevgeniya Baras is an artist based in New York. Her paintings take shape through a process of layering and accumulation, combining oil media with various found and unconventional materials. The resulting objects hover between painting and sculptural relief, with layers that frequently extend onto the sides and supports of the canvas, refusing any definitive boundary. Within these stratified compositions, Baras creates symbolic topographies which address ideas of language, migration, and translation. She's exhibited her work widely throughout the US and internationally, and is the recipient of recognitions including the Pollock-Krasner Grant and the Guggenheim Fellowship. And our host today, Amanda Millet-Sorsa, is an artist, arts writer, and arts worker based in New York. She is exhibited at Below Grand Gallery, Socrates Sculpture Park, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from the New York Studio School and BA from Brandeis, and has been a resident artist at several international organizations. Amanda is a member of the International Association of Art Critics, a curator at Below Grand, and we are very lucky to have her as a contributor here at the Brooklyn Rail. Such a privilege and an honor to have you both on the NSE today, and I'm happy to pass things over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Eleanor. And thank you for the whole Brooklyn Rail team that make these afternoon discussions possible. It's always a pleasure to be invited back again, and I look forward to the discussion with Yevgeniya, who has a fantastic exhibition of her works at Sargent's Daughters at the moment at the Lower East Side. If you're in New York, it has just opened, and I hope that you get the chance to see the work. And so here we have some of the installation shots from the show, which is a gorgeous space, and all of this new work that Yevgeniya has been working on in the past year. And so, Yevgeniya, we can begin. I understand that you spent several months of this past year as a Fulbright Fellow in Tel Aviv, creating new drawings in this residency kind of away from New York. And Eleanor, if you could have that image of the aerial view of all these drawings that Yevgeniya has been working on. This is a fantastic shot of, an artist's work in progress or thought in progress. And perhaps, Yevgeniya, you could just let us into that practice and your process. And so how does drawing fit into your practice? Essentially, how do you begin?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. And I'm so excited to speak with Amanda. This is an image of a bed in my studio, in my temporary studio in Tel Aviv. I was a senior scholar living there for 4.5 months. And there was a bed in the studio, not a bed I actually slept on, but a bed I used to look at drawings. So I would stand on a chair and make drawings, then stand on a chair and think about them from above. And I kind of accounted for time by making numerous beds of drawings. Like I would finish one bed, collect all the drawings, put them in books. That's how I store them, and then make another bed of drawings. That is, so I draw all the time. That is the way I think. but especially I tend to draw when I am not in my New York studio, when I have more headspace to invite new ideas in. They're often really small and quick. And as I already said, I make so many, and then I kind of collect them into books and store books from different chapters of my life. So maybe I was spending some time in Marfa, and I have books of drawings that are devoted to that period of time. And now around 5 books of drawings devoted to my time in Tel Aviv. I specifically, for this series of drawings, I told myself that I would like to use a ruler. That was the first time that I had that had that tool in my toolbox, because I wanted to respond. I'm always thinking about a sense of place, and often considering architecture, but I wanted to do so more directly by using a ruler. So that's the lines that you're seeing are made with a tiny plastic ruler. Otherwise, it's just colored pencils and graphite. And you're seeing like a vocabulary of symbols that I am developing, new symbols, as well as building off of ones that have been previously used in my other bodies of work.
And so when you're making these drawings, which are all kind of, you know, exciting little worlds in themselves, how do you relate them to paintings?
So, you know, for the first 2 months, I was just drawing. I was just collecting ideas. And then I also, for the first time, because being away from your regular studio means that you don't have some of your regular materials with you. So I couldn't actually make large scale paintings there. So I then took certain drawings from this series and translated them to smaller paintings, quite sculptural, but 8 by 10 inches or so. And then when I returned to New York, I translated some of those smaller paintings into larger paintings that are currently in the show.
Right. That's great. Eleanor, can we see the next slide that kind of shows us an insight into these tiny paintings? I like that we can see some of these kind of new forms and shapes you were exploring in the drawings, like this kind of star pointed shape and the rulers that then become a little bit more irregular. Were there other discoveries in terms of marks or shapes or symbols that came to you during this time?
I'm always thinking about ideas of code and something that is really layered in code versus something else that is sitting more in the open. So what I noticed during my time on this fellowship is that I really ranged symbols that were very direct, like hearts and stars and planets and bundles, versus symbols that are more complex or not as easily readable.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that there was a full span from one to the other, from the more closed to the more open. Like what you're seeing here, well, there's a flower or a kind of world to the right. And then the piece that is on the wall directly ahead of us, but in the corner, I'm thinking of that as like a stand-in for the body. And then to the left is a star that turned into a larger painting in the show. So, sorry, am I answering?
Yeah, no, you are. Perhaps we could see some of these paintings up close that are in the show.
And I should say that those paintings that you're seeing in my temporary studio, the small paintings, they're not done. They're kind of like undergarments for paintings.
Yeah.
And they're built out from found materials. So it's store-bought paint, but it's also sand and earth and yarn and maybe tiny gifts that someone may give me.
So that's what's really kind of striking about your work when you see them up close, is that they are so highly textured, and there is this relief. There's a language of relief on the surfaces.
Mm-hmm.
And the objects that you've used are kind of embedded and hidden, and we can perhaps pinpoint as to what they are, but not completely. You just mentioned a few of these objects that are found that you put in there. What else could you tell us about what you're using in this process?
Once in a while there may be like a plastic toy that I found on a playground, or that someone gave to my child in a certain place where we're spending time. Or it can be yarn or rope, or it can be the seam of a dress that I wore and then took apart, and now it's in the painting permanently. But Amanda and I were talking about this in preparation for this talk, and I was saying that I find that like listing all of the ingredients can be, maybe it's interesting to artists, or maybe it's like boring and really demystifying, but it ranges from gifts to found materials that are like of that place, to clothing that somebody dear to me could have worn, to sticks that I found on a walk. Like, for example, when I spent time at McDowell in New Hampshire, like the paintings that I started there, all of them had something from the forest, that or the trees that surround McDowell residency. So like that, I'm always thinking about the sense of place and geography. And so the materials that are found in that place get folded into the paintings.
So it does sound like these objects have a sense of meaning or geography for you, whether it's something that's shared with the viewer, or as a personal memento to you. And I love the examples that you used about sticks along your walk in New Hampshire. I don't think that would be very evident to the passerby, because it's so hidden in the paint, it's buried in the paint. But that being said, there was something in our discussion that rang true to me about the question of translation, which I think is something you think about a lot, the translation of languages or between borders, but also how perhaps a drawing translates to a painting and vice versa. Do you think you could let us in more into what you understand that to be?
One aspect I think about a lot is what happens to materials when an artist touches them. So like how something that is so daily and regular through touch gets translated into something magical. So for example, with sticks from New Hampshire, they would have been sewn onto the canvas with yarn. So they're translated because they're no longer sitting in the open. They're like covered, and they almost feel like macrame material. And then they get painted on top. So now yarn or thread appears as something else. So through all of these layers of touch, and it's the same with this body of work, is that materials go through so many processes until they become something that feels more true to my inner being. They feel more like mine. And that also, touching materials really moves me. Like that's what makes me want to return to the studio, the sensory aspect of it. So that's one kind of a translation. I'm also really interested in what happens when I take those drawings that are really simple and quick, and then what happens when I scale them up, or what happens when I empty them out, or what happens when I burden them with more visual weight, or what happens when I combine 3 of them to make a singular idea. I mean, in this body of work, there aren't such direct references to language, but in previous bodies of work, I also combined numerous languages that I speak to make a hybrid language, like actually letters. Here, there isn't, this example doesn't exist here, but I'm always thinking about how something becomes something else in a meaningful way. And through that, becomes meaningful again, or becomes meaningful in a new way.
Right. And in this connection of, paintings and drawings, and in trying to combine several of them to make one, and this metamorphosis that happens, how do you choose which drawings then become part of that translation?
Okay, I'll use the example of returning from this fellowship, and then returning with like a library of drawings, right? But having a bit of distance, like coming back to New York, displaying them on the floor in my studio, looking at them again, and seeing, which, let's say, 5 are the most interesting problem to address. Like, something about it has to be unknown, uncomfortable. Something about it has to cause me to turn upside down a little bit. And I can't say much more than that, but I do know that what I found interesting in this library right after my return, and what I found boring, can really change, which is why I saved the drawings. Like a year later, I will return to these books, and I will maybe look at something again and say, whoa, that's actually like a great raisin of an idea. Like, it's a great seed. It'll birth something exciting. And maybe I didn't think that way before about that drawing. So it just has to be that it looks like a really exciting beginning, to address materially, again, to scale up, to think about in color, to think about through relief. It has to move me enough to want to do a somersault around it.
Right, to spend time with it.
Yeah.
And that being said, it does seem that time is very present in your work. I like that you mentioned that the drawing has this quality of speed to it, of quickness, and that the paintings here, and the highly textured and mystery of the objects embedded in them, there is this constant layering and addition of multiple layers. So how do you relate and adapt to these different tempos of creation?
With this particular body of work, I understood that what I want is a really slow accumulation of materials, like slowly building mountains. And then for the very last layer, to counteract that initial speed. So slow accumulation, almost archaeological in its nature. And then for the drawing that occurs frontally, the line that you see, the kind of web of lines that travels, and this kind of language of marks, to feel like it was just someone's hand just brushed over the surface, like a bird's wing, something like that. So that underneath is super slow, and on the surface is like one breath. And I understood that that's what I wanted through making those drawings, and then that's how it got translated into painting.
And this one in particular that we're looking at, could you give us a little bit more insight about, how some of those things you just described about kind of like the last layer being this speed versus, how you got here, perhaps from a drawing or perhaps from a different point
So
of-
in this case, like everything that you're seeing that is pinkish and off-white and fabricy and textury and three-dimensional, I mean, that's like again, it's like a bird dragging something into the nest over and over again, like every day, something bringing a branch over. And then that orange circle is like, that's 3 days or something, that meaning building it out in 3D in mass and then painting a line. And you've noticed that the theme of the circle is kind of throughout the whole entire show. But yeah, maybe it's like a year of accumulating, and then it's 3 days of figuring out what is the anchor or what is the composition.
And so in terms of composition, could you speak to us a bit more about the importance of composition when you work?
I think that's what I'm definitely doing and drawing. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is what are the bones, or what is the skeleton of each painting. And sometimes the skeleton sits somewhere deeply underneath, and that's underneath the painting, and that's what holds it down. And then the surface composition changes, and sometimes that drawing, that anchoring is very frontal, like you can see I mean, here it's kind of it's a very deadpan composition. It's just a central circle, but some of them are a lot more dynamic and kind of choreographed. But I'm always thinking about what it is that is like holding down this painting. And I worry about the variety of compositions in my work, that it's something that I want to be able to speak differently through composition. So yeah, so I try to police myself for like not always being central, or how else could I say this? But clearly I am someone who's after all regularly drawn to the middle.
Right. And perhaps we can see some more of these works, and we can speak more about that kind of centralized image that keeps appearing, that you keep turning towards to. What meaning does that carry for you?
Like in this painting, it started with one composition, and that's what you're seeing underneath the kind of blue network. And then this like central body came in. So I was trying to move away from that organization, but in the end, it ended up being almost like a stack of heads in the center. Yeah, so I thought about text and letters and those marks as a kind of like code of some kind, and a central figure or a stack of heads.
And what is the code about? Is it a secret language? Is it what does the code mean for you?
I think it's definitely a secret language, but it's a secret language that thinks about mystery, thinks about our purpose on this planet, thinks about ideas of home, thinks about like bundles and bodies. Yeah, I'll stop there, but and fullness.
Okay. So going back to this question of the symbol, since we just saw, a symbol could be the circle or something coded, that we don't necessarily have a direct, meaning for or a translation for, or even the star could be a symbol or a letter like we've seen in your previous work. Could you let us in more into what these symbols mean for you, how you arrive at them, how you use them?
Well, some of them I developed after becoming a mom and thinking about my own body, thinking about this idea of two, or my child as an extension of me. So that's maybe one example. Some of these symbols I arrived at by thinking about prayer and awe. And that's what the title of the show has to do with. Some of them, even though they're not a direct, like letters and direct shapes from a particular language, I think about reading, I think about intellectual inheritance. I think about my relationship to text, all kinds of text. So the marks start standing in for that. This is just a head, like a human head. That's how I thought about this symbol.
In this particular work.
Yeah.
Right. The head is a centralized place of importance.
But maybe I should also say that the way I'm talking about these running themes or these interests for me, my personal interest is in all kinds of art, but I am closest to the kind of art where I have to do work, like emotional and intellectual work, where I have to work to decode. The kind of art that is difficult. And not that I, in my studio, am trying to purposefully make work that is hard to comprehend, but it's just somehow what sits close to my heart. And in other people's work and what comes out of me. It feels like a correct extension of me.
Right. I think we can definitely sense that, especially in the materiality. But it is interesting that you're saying that some of these symbols you've let us in more into symbols that might be more identifiable to a universal audience. There was one in particular that we were speaking about with two hearts, where we can kind of, pinpoint those, grab onto those. Maybe Eleanor, we can try and see that painting. And so what kind of shift happened in your thinking from letting us in to grab onto something that we could identify with? I think it's 38, Eleanor. Yeah, thank you.
I thought it would be interesting to include symbols that are really obvious, that are kind of like, it's almost dumb, so direct. And yeah, I think that this one is, it's probably very related to what just recently happened to me in my life about a year and 3 months ago, which is, being a painter all of my life and now being a mom too. So it's a kind of portrait of two beings.
Yeah, I can definitely sense that. It's a very touching work. And also the more so that it seems to be on this flannel blanket, which acts as the substrate, which is the only one in the show that has this kind of, vintage feel to it, for lack of a better word.
It's my grandmother's dress. That's
okay. So this
what-
is the grandmother's dress.
Yeah, so I stretched my grandmother's dress and then on stretchers and then made the painting on top of it.
It's interesting because here not only do we have the sense of, time through the composition and the application of the paint and that slowness, but we're also kind of traveling through generations in this one work, from your grandmother's dress, from one woman down to another, and the two hearts, perhaps being together, in your personal trajectory. But that being said, yeah, sorry.
I liked the obvious when it came out, this painting came out, I really liked the obviousness of it, and also that the note that it played in this body of work, like how it related to the rest of the paintings.
And so since we are on the topic of the substrates you're using and different supports, there's such a physical variety on what you're painting on, from very fine linens, traditional linens, to these rough burlaps, some of them even having the edges kind of, fluffed out. And at times it seems like we can even see the support kind of, seeping through because the paint is so heavy, or it's kind of molded onto it. Can you give us more information about how you're making these choices and what materials are you drawn to for the substrate?
I think sometimes it's a little bit more calculated, like I really want to pick a certain material in order to communicate a certain idea, and it works out. Sometimes it's an experiment, like I'm really interested in pushing against a certain material, like what happens if I do this and this and this on the surface on a velvet surface, because after all, my studio is like, it is a kind of lab. I mean, I'm experimenting, I'm posing problems to myself and responding. So that's one answer. The second answer is that I'm really interested in the history of craft. I'm not someone who is extremely knowledgeable in that realm, but it's a bit of what I collect. It's what I like to live with. It is definitely something that I look at in addition to like the history of painting. And it's like something that I know, like how to do a little bit. Like I know how to crochet a bit. I know how to macrame a bit. I sew. So I do like that there's a kind of organic conversation between these processes. My hands are interested in all of them.
Right. And so what is it that you're finding and discovering in craft that you're not getting from more mainstream works or painting or sculpture?
I just think it only enriches, like when I'm thinking about edge all the time, edges of shapes, outer edges of the paintings. And let's say that I undo the burlap on the edge, or I braid the loose threads. Like it's like putting down a mark with paint. Like it's another brush mark that the painting needs. I can't explain it beyond that. I understand that that's an important aspect of my work.
Yeah, we can definitely feel that. If one goes to see these works up close, you can see that there's a lot of panels on top of more textile supports and textiles kind of joined together that make up the work. And you really feel the hand present in the making of the works. But there's been some, a lot of new developments in the forms, in the way you're using your materials, in the symbols, some of them that have kind of like let us in more than others in your previous work. But also I've noticed that your palette has changed, or perhaps not changed, but there's been an introduction of more neons, yellows and pinks and greens, and more vivid and bright earth tones. Whereas I feel like in previous bodies of work, I've noticed that there's been a lot of dark hues, browns and blacks and blues. So I wanted to ask you, have you yourself noticed this change? And where do you think it's coming from?
I definitely always thought of myself as a painter who is much better at making a darker painting, like a nighttime painting or a muddy painting. I thought that was kind of my realm. But I'll say that besides the intention for this body of work to have the slowness and fastness, the other intention was that I really wanted the paintings to come closer to the drawings. I mean, I think a lot of painters think about this. And for so many painters, their drawings are in a way ahead of their paintings. So I wanted to mimic the page of the paper, right? And so that when I returned from my fellowship, I should say that before I left for my fellowship, I thought that this show was about 60 to 70% finished. But then when I returned, I painted over most of the paintings in white to have the surface mimic the white of the page or the off-white of the page, and then I rebuilt them. So in that way, the color is different because I wanted the white to be very present and for the color to sit like really fast and fresh. And maybe the palette is coming from the Mediterranean, but I haven't quite analyzed that. I haven't analyzed why I needed, I've actually always used neons, but much more actively here. And yeah, I think I need some time to know exactly why this grand shift happened, but I did want to say that it was really important for me that these paintings are as close to the drawings as possible in that way.
Yeah, I think we can definitely feel that. And so I'd like for us to go back to this mention of archaeology that you brought up when you're thinking about your work. And there was this sculpture I think you mentioned, which kind of is also the title of your show, Stargazer. Yeah. And Eleanor, if you could perhaps see that sculpture that was such an, turning point for you.
Yeah, it's this one. I went to Greece like every other American this summer. I literally think that I heard like American English on every inch of the way while I was in Athens. And I went to the Cycladic Museum for the first time. I was definitely thinking about the show coming up, and I have often previously pulled titles from reading, mainly poetry actually. But I was walking through the Cycladic Museum and I saw this tiny figurine, which is, the size probably of my hand, and it looked like a ritual carryable object. and the head is turned upwards, the eyes are turned upwards, and the title of this sculpture is Stargazer. And I just thought that it's from 4,360 before Common Era, and I thought that it's just a perfect title for my show, because there is something about looking upwards in awe and in hope, and I borrowed the language. Yeah.
I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that thought about the stargazer, and the thought of hope. Perhaps that is what is also accompanying your palette. But in addition to the thought of looking at the stars, we can kind of feel the constellations in some of the imagery in your work, you know, especially with the lines kind of connecting to each other. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard you say, because you have a very active activity as an educator, and you have often said that good abstraction comes from a connection to life. And so how do you relate to this insight in your own work, especially the current body of work that we have here at Sargent's Daughters? What from life has moved you into this language of abstraction?
Oh, well, really anything from a conversation with a friend to some small incident that I observed, to like a shadow, to a map of a certain place, to a body posture, can turn into a painting. But yes, I think when we were talking about that, I was saying that I think I still don't understand how an abstract painting can be completely ungrounded in life. I think it always somehow is linked, holds hands with life, and I tend to think that the more an artist has lived, the better their work is. But I also I think I'm always asking and begging my students to look at how strange and amazing life is, in order to make more specific choices in their paintings, rather than just rely on making things up.
Mm-hmm. And so in looking at these strange things in life, are there certain artists, either in history, in the canon, or outside of it, that have been an influence on you that you're looking at or in dialogue with?
For sure. I'm always looking at art. I'm looking at art within my immediate community, and have incredible artists who I'm in conversation with regularly, living right around me in New York. But maybe if we speak historically, Milton Resnick is someone whose work I have always loved. Even though maybe it's not that apparent with this current body of work, because his is moodier and darker and more leaning into a color field but yes, that's someone whose work I'm constantly thinking about. I think,
and what about his work?
Oh, I love how much information is in like a muddy, giant green field. I think about that surface and all the like pain that's buried underneath that surface. Like I really see it as a battleground, artistically and personally speaking. I think it just contains so much complexity. And yeah, but for those reasons, it's really moving to me how much he can say with these parameters that he has set up for himself. Gottlieb is another artist I love for the mysterious symbolic spaces. Nicholas de Stael, Golub.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, Guston. I think it's it's impossible not to mention him every time this question comes up. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Okay, sure.
Of course, Paul Klee. Someone asked me at the opening, do I love Paul Klee? Yes, I love Paul Klee.
I'm sure there are many others as well, but I can see how, the surfaces of the Stahl and Resnick, could resonate with you and things you carry with you. And kind of the alphabet also that Guston, brought into his visual language, and also the tragedies. But I think what you just pointed out of, looking at the work of artists who have lived through something and who have these complexities of surfaces, as you just so, poignantly pointed out for Resnick, is something that you're drawn to about the life lived and what that work looks like for an artist who has had that life. Could you perhaps give us a little bit more of your insights onto why are you drawn to the work of these kinds of artists?
I don't want to exoticize the story. I'm drawn to their art first and to the seriousness of their practice and the commitment and the kind of challenging problems that they have posed for themselves. But I think that their personal pain and their knowledge about life informs that work in really profound ways. I can go artist to artist back through that list, but I think that each, de Stael, Resnick, Guston, they knew about suffering, and and I think that it's unavoidable when looking at their work. And I don't know, I think about how I translate my own story into this work in a way that they're both paintings that there's something for the viewer to discover materially, there's something for the viewer to discover in terms of color, in terms of scale, in terms of installation, but also if they spend longer, there might be this abstraction is personal, but not in a kind of I don't know, it's not the story that leads, but it's kind of hovering underneath.
Yeah, you can definitely feel that they're a kind of portal. And so perhaps going back to maybe some initial stages of your language and your vocabulary, why did you start engaging in high relief paintings? At what point did that become, a starting point for not only this body of work, but, when you first started to engage with painting?
Because I think just in terms, I realized that I'm really interested in different ways of making a line, for example, like how a line that reads when it's just painted versus how a line reads when it's sculpted and then painted, that it felt right to have both in my work. I don't know. I just wanted to involve another sense. Like there are certain paintings you look at and they're flat and they say everything they need to say that way. With mine, I felt like it had to slightly invade the viewer's space.
Mm-hmm.
And it had to kind of cause this, like, what if I could touch it? Like, what if I could run my hand across it? That would be another way to read the surface. I understood that that's important. I mean, I want to say that earlier, like 20 years ago, I only made work about my family's history by depicting the body, like fragmented body, but abstractly, right? And then the next step was to think about how paint could do that as a material more aggressively. And so I slowly started to build paint up. And then this is where I've arrived. So it's like a 20-year gradual process. But so that's, I think, one answer. And the other is like, one of my childhood memories, because I grew up in the Soviet Union, is that all the like amazing like theater buildings, theaters, movie theaters, they all had reliefs facing the public frontally. So like if you walked on the street, there were these incredible, you'd look up and above the door, there would be incredible, the entrance to these buildings, there were incredible reliefs. And I'm not a sculptor. I'm very interested in the conversation around painting, but maybe there's something there because like childhood, obviously it stays with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And right. I mean, you've really walked us through your practice and your process. I feel like you've really let us in. So thank you for being generous in that way. And I remember this one in particular that we have in front of us is so thick. It has just so many layers. And it's very different from some of the rest of the paintings in the show, because I feel like it acts as a kind of island or map, and each hue is just so distinct. It has its separations, but not only that, but you can really feel it in the solidity of the surface area that each one of those little fragments occupies. So not perhaps this painting, or if there are others, in finishing this body of work, have there been new openings that have happened for you, new discoveries as a result of, putting this out there? Is there anything that you've noticed in particular? Kind of like the ruler was new for you back when you were making the first steps of this body of work.
I definitely feel like the painting you just talked about, I thought about how closed it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because of these solid shapes, how the viewer can't, afterwards, after I made it, I thought about how, and that's why it's also in the show, I thought it was important that it's interlocking, that it's, that the way that it feels completely locked. And then in order to juxtapose other paintings that felt a lot more airy and open, I wanted it to be there as an opposition in this body of work. But as far as discoveries, I think that like I need to return to the studio in order to be able to comment on that. I don't know. I don't yet know where this body of work will lead me. I think that maybe I was saying this to you about Gottlieb, that I am always in awe of artists who can say something so complex in a simpler, more concise sentence. Like editing feels like it's an earned thing. I mean, I'm also thinking about like how I wrote as a freshman or a sophomore versus how I write now. Even when I write an email, sentences are shorter, there are less run-ons, right? Because I can confidently say something in a more concise manner. So I think something similar happens with painting, where like less is more. And I know there's a lot going on, but I feel like one thing that has happened with this body of work is that I've realized that what I used to think was not enough, I've decided is enough. You know, and I don't know what else I'll strip or subtract next time, but I have this feeling that I'm carrying with myself from this body of work.
Okay. Well, maybe that's a good place to wrap it up and leave us, in suspense for the next paintings and drawings to come. I wanted to thank you, Yevgeniya, for sharing with us all of these insights, which I think, will hold us in contemplation for, a few days now, or especially until your show ends. Eleanor, I think we can open it up to the question and answer before our poetry reading, which will close off this discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amanda and Yevgeniya, for the brilliant and super insightful conversation. It's been so lovely. We've got a few questions from the audience and a lot of beautiful comments in the chat as well. The first question today will be from our friend GE.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Yevgeniya. Do you believe you found a revolutionary religious spirit that won't necessarily harden into an orthodoxy, but have sort of this mystical character that's moored to tradition, but still remaining plastic or pliant?
Wow, what a question. No, well, first of all, I should say, I think that's on others to decide whether there's something revolutionary happening. I don't know, but I think my work is tied to my own spiritual tradition. And then whoever comes in there into the show and sees something, and if they think it's spiritual, awesome. But I can't comment. That would be so that would be real conceited of me to assume anything beyond that. I'm just making paintings that are, that hopefully that take me to a new place. But everyone else, that's their business.
Thank you. Well, I believe that the personal is where the revolutionary stuff starts anyway. So, and I think you're on that path, certainly. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, GE. If anyone else would like to ask a question today, please feel free to message or raise your hand. Saw a lot of great comments in the chat. I would like to ask you a question, Yevgeniya. Your works, at least, and this body of work particularly, is so textural, as we've been discussing, and so three-dimensional. There's so much almost tangible there. And obviously you were very inspired by that particular Stargazer sculpture in this work. And I'm just wondering, it was briefly mentioned, but I'm wondering if you've ever integrated sculpture into your creative practice, or if that's something that you are curious about or something that you would explore.
I'm curious about it, but I feel like in order to be good at anything, you have to have time. And currently, I just don't have time to explore that aspect. If I had like a whole other 15 hours to my day, I feel like I would explore some other venue. Like I'm really interested in wood. I would love to, carve wood. That's one aspect. I love ceramics, like many human beings probably on this call. And I did tour a ceramic studio, but that's as far as it went. Just because every bit of creative energy I have goes to painting for now, but we'll see. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. We have another question that's come in from Mary Joan in the audience. Mary Joan said, your paintings are untitled. Wondering more about this choice, if you could explain it.
It's like very similar to what I just said about sculpture, which is, I think, being good with being interesting and precise and good and creative with language is also a project, like a separate project. And if I once in a while I have a real feeling around a title for a painting, and then I'll title it. But this show has 20 paintings, and it was just impossible for me to come up with 20 paintings that I felt like I was using language in such a way that I wasn't explaining, but I was adding something to the painting itself. So there just weren't words that were precisely selected to be good titles. So it's not out of laziness, it's out of respect for how hard it is to work with language.
Definitely.
But I do have a lot to say about press releases. When texts are written, I'm interested in reading them and saying what I like and what I don't like and what I think is working. But yeah, titles not yet. Always title my shows though.
Amazing. Thank you for that question, Mary Joan, and thanks for that response, Yevgeniya. We have a question that's come in from Natalie, and Natalie, I'm going to give you the chance to unmute if you'd like to ask.
Hello, Yevgeniya. This is Natalie Berlitskaya.
Hi.
I missed your show, unfortunately. I mean, the opening, but I will stop by. So I wanted to ask you one question because, I mean, not just one, but here one. Because I saw your previous shows and I love your work, So do you influence a curator to curate, to select your works into certain shows, or does a curator use their own eyes, judgment and whatever and just pick the works? I'm curious as a curator too. Thank you.
In this case, two different people from the gallery did individual studio visits with me, and we decided to bring and they obviously during these visits they had their own opinions about editing and which works should and shouldn't be part of the show. But we decided that we would travel all of the works to the gallery, and then all of us had a conversation during installation. But I come to that, like I had 2 or 3 paintings that I felt like they must be, like they cannot be edited out. They have to be in the show. But I also come with a kind of spirit of openness, like if there is a good argument for certain paintings to be hung really close to each other, or these 5 need to be in a sentence. Like, I think that I want the curator to have, to do their art too. someone who's thinking and eyes I respect, I want them to also play a role and to be able to be creative in installing the show. If it's a group show, then usually I present a few images to the person who is curating, then they select, and then they hang the show. With the solos, I've always collaborated with the gallerist and their director. But letting them play, letting them be as well. Yeah, thank you for the question. So nice to hear from you. I haven't seen you in a long time.
Yeah, that was a really great question, Natalie. Thank you so much. Thanks, Yevgeniya, as well. I believe that was our last question from the audience, unless anybody else would like to jump in, but there's a lot of love in the chat, so thanks for sharing that, everyone. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of concluding our community events with a poetry reading. And today I am so excited to welcome our Poet Laureate of the day, Sophia Dahlin, to the stage. Sophia Dahlin is the author of the poetry collection Natch. She earned her BA from Bard College and her MFA from the University of Iowa, where she was an Iowa Arts Fellow. Her work has appeared in many journals, including Bomb, Fence, and others. With Jacob Kahn, she edits the chapbook Press Eyelet. Dahlin lives in Oakland, California, where she teaches with California poets in the schools, conducts generative writing workshops, and hosts occasional readings. Sophia, we're so thrilled that you're here.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you, Amanda and Yevgeniya. That was a wonderful discussion. Yevgeniya, your work is it's just so fascinating and beautiful. It was nice to spend more time with it. I changed what I'm going to read because I was inspired. I have different things to say now. So this is from Natch. This is my first book. And this poem is called True. Eclipse to be new weather. What snaps in the holding of together undergrows the lived with obvious and the forgotten dream. Who would not say holding is worthy, is an adherent, regardless? Nonetheless, gravity, even as it compounds us, gives us toys, rest, and sincerity, or their possibility. And I'm going to read some newer work. When you know, you know. When you have your love and it casts a little shadow, like a vase moved against the light cast by the window's sun, it performs against the vase's figure, its element of darkness. When your love, you know, is moved by a hand and stains the page, stains thus a movement caught by volcano, asked against a blonde wallpaper, a movement. When you know your love has flowed, it went left and left a trail like a beard, a remaining trail that says the words have flown, left like hand shadows of birds fly in the winter. And this poem is called To Children, and I wrote it after the poet Bernadette Mayer, who we lost this February, who wrote a poem to men. And want to give that to men. So this is To Children. To children, you step on the hem of elegance. You are elementary, dear sons. You are small songs, and I name you sonnet. You are born French, and I name you toilette. Born rich, you immediately relieve me of the cost of your caretake. I order you a mink Harvard. You put your diapers in the stable. You are not the ghost of any other. You look exactly like her in the eyes and mouth. You are not a cat snoring in the sun. When you dream, you are about to taste it. Glenn Gould would find you variable. You are fast at play, slower in the shower. The morning is a game to you. Vitamins chase you and you heal instantly. Your skin spits pins out hard, they ricochet. Only the blades of the fan entice you, so I must enchant your hands to fold. A little face is awash in wonderment. A happy child is implacable in judgment. 3/4 teachers are bad, you say. I am my own sauce. You bob your hair just like mine. When I cut it again, you stop dead in the stairwell. It's summer. It will be our last interaction. You ask me to sit in the back seat and say romantically, I've always needed someone back here with me. You take up a space at the table. Your hands go clatter, clatter with spoons in. You serve tea to our guests, but leave the cups out. You hand me the crumpled popsicle wrapper. You crouch in imitation of another species. When you are mad, you bark. I walk entirely through my own body. I come up with only images of you. I've been writing about children for a while. Today, I can't read these works without thinking of the over 2,000 Palestinian children who have been murdered in the last 2 weeks with US-funded weaponry. So I'm going to read one more poem. And this poem was meant to call a child into my life. But today, it's making me also think of every parent in Gaza who's desperate to shelter their children who might live long enough to see a ceasefire. And it's called Pad. Baby, if you come to me, I'll make so soft my cottage, so bent my basket, handles stuffed with weedy blooms, fur lined my skins, fire fat my ashes, the lumpen beams bulbous with wood slub, faces implied in the wood slub. Babe, if you just drop, I'll land you on a vernal pad, snatched grass, a wet streak of dew-dank pasture, futon of sprung moss. There'll be a window box of filmy herbs, green things with all the error and detail of the natural. I'll polish limes, pound rocks of salt to airborne sparkling, stash dregs, coax penicillin flowers from salchichon, and fat your baby knees. If babe you'll be, I'll lay picnic for you, set entrees on the floor, meat door, fruit door. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for that incredible reading and for your really important, crucial words. Thank you so much for concluding today. And a huge thanks again to Yevgeniya and Amanda for the amazing conversation. And thank you as well to Sophia from Sargent's Daughters Gallery for supporting behind the scenes as we prepared for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and for making these daily conversations possible, as well as for their support of our archive, which you can view on our YouTube channel and where this conversation will be shortly. For the past 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the work we do here at the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for a conversation with Amy Ng, Richard J. Powell, and Jason Rosenfeld on the event of Barclay L. Hendricks, Portraits at the Frick Collection. We will conclude tomorrow with a reading by J. Elizabeth Elijah. Thanks all again for tuning in today, and we can now turn on the microphones and say hello and goodbye as we leave. Thank you so much, everyone. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yevgeniya. Thanks,
Beautiful
Amanda.
work.
Thank you, Yevgeniya. Thank you, Amanda.
Yevgeniya.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yevgeniya. Thanks, Amanda.